Marcus Thompson had been working as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for 8 years. At 32 years old, he was one of the youngest guards to reach his position, known for his sharp reflexes and unwavering dedication. His muscular frame stood at 6 feet 2 inches, and his piercing blue eyes could spot trouble from a mile away. Everyone who worked with Marcus knew he was different from the other guards. He moved like a shadow, appeared and disappeared without making a sound, and had an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it happened. On this particular Tuesday morning in London, Marcus was assigned to patrol the outer perimeter of the palace grounds. The weather was typical for October. Gray clouds hung low in the sky, threatening rain at any moment. Tourists gathered outside the gates as usual, taking photos and hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. Marcus walked his route with practiced precision, his red uniform immaculate, his black boots polished to perfection. He carried himself with the dignity expected of someone protecting the crown. What the public didn't know about Marcus was his past. Before becoming a royal guard, he had served in the special forces for 6 years. During his military service, he had undergone extensive training in escape techniques, hand-to-hand combat, and survival skills. His commanding officers had often remarked that Marcus seemed to have an almost magical ability to slip out of impossible situations. They called him the Ghost because of how he could vanish and reappear during training exercises. After leaving the military, Marcus had applied to become a royal guard, passing every test with flying colors. His background check was spotless, his references impeccable, and his skills unmatched. The palace security chief had personally recruited him, impressed by his military record and natural abilities. Marcus took his new role seriously, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with protecting the royal family. As he walked his patrol that morning, Marcus noticed something unusual. A black sedan had been parked across the street for over an hour, which was strange because parking in that area was strictly prohibited. Through his peripheral vision, he could see 2 men sitting inside the car, occasionally lifting cameras with long lenses toward the palace. At first, Marcus assumed they were journalists or paparazzi, which was common enough. But something about their behavior made him uneasy. The driver kept checking his watch while the passengers seemed to be taking notes rather than photographs. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts during his military service, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. He discreetly spoke into his radio, reporting the suspicious vehicle to the control room. The response came back quickly. They had no record of any authorized media presence in that location. Marcus continued his patrol but kept the sedan in his sight. After another 20 minutes, he saw the passenger get out of the car and walk toward a nearby phone booth. This was definitely unusual in an age when everyone carried mobile phones. The man made a brief call, then returned to the vehicle. Within minutes, Marcus noticed 2 more similar cars arriving and parking at strategic points around the palace perimeter. His training kicked in immediately. This was classic surveillance behavior: multiple vehicles, coordinated timing, and the use of old-fashioned communication methods that couldn't be easily traced. Marcus reported his observations to the control room again, this time with more urgency in his voice. The security chief's response was immediate. Maintain visual contact but do not approach. We're sending backup. But before backup could arrive, something unexpected happened. A police car pulled up behind Marcus and 2 officers got out. Marcus recognized them as local metropolitan police officers who occasionally patrolled the area around the palace. However, something seemed off about their demeanor. They approached Marcus with an unusual sense of purpose, their hands resting on their equipment belts in a way that suggested they were prepared for confrontation. "Excuse me, sir," the taller officer called out. "We need to have a word with you." Marcus turned to face them, maintaining his professional composure. "Good morning, officers. Is there something I can help you with?" The shorter officer stepped forward, his eyes avoiding direct contact with Marcus. "We've received a report about suspicious behavior in this area. We need to ask you some questions." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. His years of training had taught him to recognize when something wasn't right, and every fiber of his being was now alerting him to danger. These officers weren't behaving like legitimate police conducting a routine inquiry. Their body language was too tense, their questions too vague, and their timing too convenient given the suspicious vehicles he had just reported. "I'm a royal guard on duty," Marcus replied calmly. Perhaps you should speak with the palace security office if you have concerns about this area. The taller officer exchanged a quick glance with his partner. That won't be necessary. We have our orders. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Marcus's mind raced. Something was very wrong. Legitimate police officers wouldn't arrest a royal guard without proper authorization from the palace security chief. These men were either corrupt officers being paid by whoever was in those surveillance vehicles, or they weren't real police at all. Either way, Marcus knew he was in serious danger. On what grounds? Marcus asked, stalling for time while he assessed his options. Suspicious behavior and failure to comply with police instructions, the shorter officer replied, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Marcus realized he had to make a decision quickly. If these were real police officers acting under false information, resisting would only make things worse. But if they were imposters or corrupt officials, complying could put both himself and the royal family at risk. His radio crackled with static, but no backup appeared to be coming. The taller officer stepped closer. Turn around now or we'll have to use force. Marcus looked around quickly. The suspicious sedan was still parked across the street, and he could see the occupants watching the scene unfold. The other vehicles he had spotted were also in position. This was clearly a coordinated operation designed to remove him from his post during some kind of planned incident. As the officer with the handcuffs moved behind him, Marcus made his choice. He would comply for now, but he was already planning his next move. His special forces training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation. He just hoped he hadn't lost his touch. Marcus slowly turned around, raising his hands to shoulder height. The shorter officer stepped forward with the handcuffs while his partner maintained a watchful position. As the cold metal touched Marcus's wrists, he felt the familiar click of the first cuff closing. His years of military training had included extensive practice with escape techniques, including how to get out of restraints under pressure. He had hoped he would never need those skills again, but life had other plans. You're making a mistake, Marcus said quietly, allowing the second handcuff to be applied. The officer tightened them more than necessary, causing the metal to dig into Marcus's skin. This confirmed his suspicions. Legitimate police officers were trained to apply restraints firmly but not painfully unless the suspect was resisting. The only mistake here is yours, the taller officer replied. You should have minded your own business instead of asking so many questions about vehicles that don't concern you. Marcus's blood ran cold. These officers knew exactly why they were arresting him, because he had spotted the surveillance operation. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or following up on a false report. This was a deliberate attempt to neutralize him, while something bigger was being planned. He thought about the royal family inside the palace, going about their daily routines, unaware that their security had been compromised. The officers began walking Marcus toward their police car, but he noticed they weren't following standard procedure. They hadn't read him his rights, hadn't told him what station they were taking him to, and hadn't radioed in the arrest. Real police officers would have documented every step of this process. Marcus also observed that their police car, while it looked authentic, had slight differences from the standard metropolitan police vehicles he was familiar with. As they approached the car, Marcus caught sight of the license plate and memorized it instantly. The number seemed oddly formatted, and he suspected it might be fake. The shorter officer opened the rear door of the police car while his partner maintained a grip on Marcus's arm. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for, when their attention would be momentarily divided. Watch your head, the officer said, preparing to guide Marcus into the back seat. Marcus had spent countless hours during his military training practicing escape techniques. One of the most important lessons was that handcuffs, while effective, weren't impossible to escape from if you knew the right techniques and had the flexibility and strength to execute them. The key was timing and misdirection. As the officer pushed down on his head to guide him into the car, Marcus suddenly dropped to one knee and twisted his body in a specific way he had practiced hundreds of times. The movement was so quick and unexpected that both officers were caught off guard. Using a technique that combined flexibility, leverage, and knowledge of how handcuffs worked, Marcus managed to slip one hand free from the restraints. The shorter officer lunged forward to grab him, but Marcus was already in motion. Years of combat training had taught him to use his environment to his advantage. He rolled under the police car and came out on the other side, putting the vehicle between himself and the officers. The remaining handcuff dangled from his left wrist, but his right hand was completely free. "Stop right there," the taller officer shouted, reaching for his radio. But Marcus was already moving. He sprinted toward the palace gates, knowing that once he reached the security checkpoint, he would be safe. The officers gave chase, but Marcus had always been faster than average. His morning runs around the palace grounds had kept him in peak physical condition, and adrenaline was now fueling his escape. The tourists outside the palace gates scattered in confusion as they saw a royal guard running toward them with a handcuff dangling from his wrist, followed by 2 police officers shouting for him to stop. Some people began taking photos and videos with their phones, not understanding what they were witnessing. Marcus reached the security checkpoint and immediately identified himself to the armed guard stationed there. "Royal Guard Thompson, badge number 247, he called out breathlessly. "Those officers are not legitimate. We have a security breach in progress." The security guards at the checkpoint knew Marcus well, and they could see the genuine panic in his eyes. They immediately moved to intercept the pursuing officers while simultaneously radioing for the security chief. The situation was escalating quickly, and they needed to determine what was really happening. The 2 officers stopped their pursuit when they saw the armed guards blocking their path. "That man is under arrest," the taller officer called out. "He's suspected of terrorist activities." Marcus shook his head vigorously. "Check their credentials," he urged the security guards. "I've been monitoring suspicious vehicles around the perimeter. This arrest is designed to remove me from my post." The head of checkpoint security, Sergeant Williams, had worked with Marcus for 3 years and trusted his judgment implicitly. "Show me your warrant and authorization for arresting a royal guard," he demanded of the officers. The 2 men exchanged nervous glances. "We don't need special authorization," the shorter officer replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, you do," Sergeant Williams stated firmly. "Any arrest of royal security personnel requires approval from the palace security chief and the Metropolitan Police Commissioner." "Where's your paperwork?" While this confrontation was taking place, Marcus spotted something that made his heart race. The black sedan he had been watching was now moving, along with the other suspicious vehicles. They were converging on a different section of the palace perimeter, the east gate where VIP visitors typically entered and exited. "Sergeant Williams," Marcus said urgently, "we need to contact the control room immediately. Those vehicles I reported are now moving toward the east gate." This arrest was meant to distract from whatever they're planning. Sergeant Williams immediately spoke into his radio. "Control room, this is Checkpoint Alpha. We have a code yellow situation. Suspicious vehicles reported by Guard Thompson are now mobile and approaching the east perimeter. Request immediate backup and vehicle interdiction." The response from the control room was swift and professional. Within seconds, Marcus could hear the sound of additional security vehicles starting up from various points around the palace grounds. The coordinated response demonstrated exactly why the royal security system was considered one of the best in the world. The 2 officers who had arrested Marcus were now looking increasingly uncomfortable. When they realized that their plan had failed and that palace security was mobilizing, they began backing away from the checkpoint. "This isn't over," the taller officer muttered. "Actually, it is," Sergeant Williams replied, signaling to his men. "You're not going anywhere until we verify your identities and find out who sent you." But the officers had other plans. They turned and ran toward their police car, jumping in and speeding away before the security guards could stop them. Marcus watched them go, noting the direction they headed and the time on his watch. Every detail would be important for the investigation that would surely follow. Within minutes of the fake officer's escape, the palace grounds transformed into a well-orchestrated security operation. Marcus found himself in the control room, surrounded by monitors displaying feeds from dozens of security cameras positioned throughout the area. The security chief, Commander Sarah Mitchell, arrived within 5 minutes of being alerted. She was a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Thompson, I need a complete report," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Start from the beginning and don't leave out any details." Marcus removed the remaining handcuff with the help of a security technician while he spoke. "At approximately 9:15 this morning, I noticed a black sedan parked illegally across from the main gates. 2 occupants, both male, appeared to be conducting surveillance rather than typical tourist photography. I reported this to the control room and continued monitoring. Commander Mitchell nodded, making notes on her tablet. Continue. At 9:35, one of the men used a public phone booth to make a call. Within 10 minutes, 2 additional vehicles arrived and positioned themselves at strategic points around the perimeter. Classic surveillance pattern. That's when the fake police officers arrived and arrested me on false charges. The control room buzzed with activity as technicians worked to track the movement of the suspicious vehicles. Large screens showed aerial views from security helicopters that had been dispatched to search the surrounding area. Marcus watched as the vehicles appeared on various camera feeds, moving through London traffic with obvious coordination. "Sir," called out Technical Sergeant Davis from his station. "We've got eyes on all 3 vehicles. They're heading toward Westminster Bridge, maintaining formation but trying to look casual." Commander Mitchell studied the screens. "Patch me through to Metropolitan Police Headquarters. We need to coordinate an intercept, but carefully. If these people are willing to use fake police officers, they might have other resources we don't know about." Marcus stepped closer to the monitors, his trained eye picking up details others might miss. "Commander, look at their driving pattern. They're not trying to escape the city. They're positioning themselves for something else." She followed his gaze and saw what he meant. The 3 vehicles weren't fleeing randomly. They were moving toward specific locations that formed a triangle around a particular area of central London. "What's in the center of that triangle?" she asked the technical team. "Running analysis now," Davis replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard, cross-referencing with today's scheduled events and VIP movements. After a few seconds, his face went pale. "Ma'am, the Princess Royal is scheduled to open a new children's hospital in that exact area at 2 p.m. today." The room fell silent for a moment as the implications sank in. The surveillance of the palace hadn't been preparation for an attack on the royal residence itself. It had been reconnaissance to learn the security protocols and timing for removing key personnel. By getting Marcus arrested and taken away from his post, they had hoped to create a gap in the security coverage during a shift change. "How long until the princess leaves for the hospital opening?" Commander Mitchell asked. 45 minutes, came the reply from another technician monitoring the royal schedule. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Commander, they needed to know our response times and procedures. That's why they went through the elaborate setup with the fake arrest. They were testing how quickly we could mobilize and how we handle security breaches." Commander Mitchell was already on the phone with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. "We need immediate tactical support at these coordinates," she said, reading off the positions of the 3 suspicious vehicles. "This is a potential threat to a senior royal family member." While she coordinated with external agencies, Marcus studied the surveillance footage more carefully. Something was bothering him about the way the fake officers had behaved. "Davis, can you pull up the footage of my arrest?" The technician switched one of the monitors to show the recorded scene from multiple camera angles. Marcus watched himself being handcuffed and then making his escape. "There," he said, pointing at the screen. "Look at how they reacted when I got away." The room watched as the footage showed the fake officer's response to Marcus's escape. Instead of immediately pursuing him with maximum effort, they had hesitated for several seconds, looking at each other as if uncertain about their next move. They weren't real police officers, but they also weren't professional criminals, Marcus realized. Real criminals would have either shot me or tackled me immediately. These guys looked like they were following a script and didn't know what to do when things went off plan. Commander Mitchell finished her phone call and turned back to the team. "The Met Police are moving to intercept the vehicles, but they're being cautious in case this is a larger operation. Marcus, I need you to think. During your military service, did you encounter anything similar to this?" Marcus closed his eyes and thought back to his Special Forces days. "Yes, actually. This feels like a training exercise that's being run by people who learn the tactics but don't have real operational experience. During my service, we sometimes worked with private security companies that employed former military personnel. Some of them were excellent, but others had just enough training to be dangerous without having the instincts and experience to handle unexpected situations." "You think this is a private operation?" "It's possible. The coordination suggests professional planning, but the execution shows gaps that indicate they're not career criminals or foreign agents. The fake police uniforms and vehicle were too good to be amateur, but not quite perfect enough to fool someone with my background." Suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the control room. "Ma'am," called out Sergeant Davis urgently, We've lost contact with one of the surveillance vehicles. It's not showing up on any of our camera feeds. Commander Mitchell immediately activated the emergency protocols. Code Red, all units report to stations. Thompson, you're with me. We're going to shadow the princess's motorcade in an unmarked vehicle. Marcus nodded, adrenaline coursing through his system again. What about my uniform? I'm not exactly inconspicuous looking like this. His red Royal Guard uniform would stand out dramatically in any covert operation. Davis, get Thompson a civilian security outfit quickly, the commander ordered. Radio ahead to the hospital and have them increase security, and get me a direct line to the princess's protection detail. As Marcus changed into dark civilian clothes and a bulletproof vest, he could hear Commander Mitchell coordinating with multiple agencies. The smooth efficiency of the response impressed him, but he also knew that the enemy had been planning this operation for weeks, or possibly months. They would have contingencies and backup plans. Thompson, you ready? Commander Mitchell called out as she prepared to leave the control room. Ready? Marcus replied, checking the communication earpiece he'd been given. But Commander, there's something else. Those fake officers knew too much about my patrol schedule and the surveillance I had spotted. Either they had inside information, or they've been watching the palace security routines for a very long time. She paused at the door, her expression grave. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Let's go. Commander Mitchell and Marcus sped through London streets in an unmarked black Range Rover, following the route that the Princess Royal's motorcade would take to the hospital opening. Through their earpieces, they could hear constant updates from various security teams positioned throughout the city. The Metropolitan Police had successfully located 2 of the 3 suspicious vehicles, but the occupants had abandoned them and disappeared into the crowds. Control to Alpha Team, came the voice through their radios. Princess Royal's departure delayed by 15 minutes due to security review. Hospital security has been increased and we have plainclothes officers positioned throughout the area. Marcus studied the tablet displaying real-time traffic and security camera feeds. Commander, if I were planning this operation, I would have multiple backup plans. The fact that they let 2 of their vehicles be found suggests they wanted us to think we'd neutralize the threat. Agreed, she replied, navigating through traffic with the skill of someone who had been doing high-stakes driving for decades. What would your backup plan be? Marcus thought carefully, drawing on his military experience. I would have positioned the real threat team separately from the surveillance team. The vehicles we've been tracking were probably meant to be discovered once they'd served their purpose of gathering intelligence and testing our response times. As if to confirm his suspicions, their radio crackled with urgent news. All units be advised. We've identified the missing 3rd vehicle. It's been found abandoned in a parking garage 2 blocks from the hospital. Explosive detection teams are en route. Commander Mitchell pressed harder on the accelerator. How much do you want to bet that vehicle was left there to draw our resources away from the real threat? No bet, Marcus replied grimly. But it also tells us something important. They're definitely targeting the hospital opening, and they're using classic misdirection tactics. They arrived at the hospital 20 minutes before the princess was scheduled to appear. The building was a new children's facility, bright and modern, with large windows and an open plaza in front where the dedication ceremony would take place. Marcus immediately began scanning the area with the tactical awareness that had been drilled into him during his military service. Too many sight lines, he muttered, noting the surrounding buildings that overlooked the plaza, and too many civilians. Commander Mitchell was coordinating with the local security chief, a tall man named Inspector Davies who looked overwhelmed by the situation. We've got snipers on 3 buildings, he was saying, and metal detectors at every entrance. But with this many people, Marcus interrupted politely. Inspector, have you checked the buildings that were under construction? Unfinished structures often have easy access and fewer security measures. Inspector Davies pulled out his tablet and checked the area map. There's a new office building 2 blocks east that's still being fitted out. Construction crews aren't scheduled today because of the royal visit. That's where I would position my team, Marcus said immediately. High vantage point, multiple escape routes, and no civilian workers to complicate things. Commander Mitchell nodded. Davies, get a team over there now. Marcus and I will take the south approach. As they moved toward the construction site, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of heightened awareness that had served him well in combat zones. Every shadow, every sound, every movement of the crowd registered in his consciousness. Through his earpiece, he could hear updates on the princess's approach, She was now only 10 minutes away from the hospital. The unfinished office building loomed ahead of them, its concrete skeleton rising 8 stories above the street level. Construction barriers surrounded the base, but Marcus could see several gaps where someone could have gained entry. He and Commander Mitchell approached from different angles, using hand signals to communicate their positions. "Ground floor clear," Commander Mitchell whispered into her radio after checking the first level. Marcus climbed the temporary construction stairs, moving as quietly as possible. Each floor revealed more concrete and steel, with plastic sheeting covering some of the window openings. The building offered perfect views of the hospital plaza, and Marcus's military instincts told him they were in the right place. On the 6th floor, he found what he was looking for, evidence that someone had been there recently. Cigarette butts that were still fresh, a discarded coffee cup that was still warm, and most tellingly, small marks in the concrete dust where someone had set up equipment. "Commander," he whispered into his radio. "6th floor. Someone was definitely here and recently. Copy that. I'm coming up." But before she could join him, Marcus heard a sound that made his blood freeze. The distinctive click of a rifle bolt being chambered. The sound came from the floor above him. Without hesitation, he pressed himself against the concrete wall and spoke quietly into his radio. "Contact on 7. Armed individual. Maintain radio silence." Marcus began climbing toward the 7th floor using every stealth technique he had learned during his military service. The construction site provided plenty of cover, but it also created acoustic challenges. Any noise would echo through the concrete structure. As he reached the 7th floor, Marcus could see movement near the far window. A figure was crouched behind construction materials, and the outline of a rifle was clearly visible. Through the plastic sheeting covering the windows, Marcus could see the hospital plaza below, where security teams were making final preparations for the princess's arrival. The person with the rifle was focused entirely on the scene below and hadn't noticed Marcus's approach. This gave Marcus a critical advantage, but he also realized he was facing a dilemma. If he called for backup, the radio chatter might alert the shooter. If he tried to take action alone, he risked the person escaping, or worse, taking a shot at the princess. Marcus made his decision. Drawing on his Special Forces training, he began moving closer to the shooter, using the concrete pillars and construction materials as cover. Every step had to be perfect. One wrong move would compromise everything. As he got closer, Marcus could see that the person was wearing dark clothing and appeared to be setting up for a long-range shot. The rifle looked professional, possibly military grade. This wasn't some amateur with a grudge. This was someone with training and proper equipment. 20 feet away from the shooter, Marcus could hear radio chatter coming from the person's position. "Target approaching venue. ETA 3 minutes. Confirm green light." Marcus realized he was running out of time. The princess's motorcade would be arriving any moment, and once she stepped out onto the plaza, she would be vulnerable. He had to act now. Moving with the speed and silence that had earned him his nickname, the Ghost, during his military service, Marcus closed the remaining distance. The shooter was so focused on the target below that he never sensed the approach. In one fluid motion, Marcus grabbed the rifle with his left hand while simultaneously applying a sleeper hold with his right arm. The shooter struggled briefly but was unconscious within seconds. Marcus had been trained to neutralize threats without killing when possible, and his technique was flawless. "Commander," he whispered into his radio, "threat neutralized on 7, but we may have more, so copy that. Princess arriving now. Hold position." Through the window, Marcus could see the royal motorcade pulling up to the hospital. The princess emerged from her vehicle, smiling and waving at the gathered crowd, completely unaware of how close she had come to disaster. Marcus quickly secured the unconscious shooter with zip ties from his tactical kit and examined the rifle. It was a high-end sniper weapon with a scope that could easily reach the hospital plaza below. As he checked the shooter's pockets for identification, his radio crackled with Commander Mitchell's voice. "Thompson, we've got movement on the 8th floor. Thermal imaging shows at least 2 more individuals up there." Marcus's heart sank. This wasn't a lone gunman. It was a coordinated team with backup shooters positioned on multiple floors. The person he had captured was likely just one part of a larger operation. He looked down at the plaza where the Princess Royal was now walking toward the hospital entrance. surrounded by her protection detail but still exposed to potential threats from above. "Commander, we need to evacuate the princess immediately," Marcus whispered urgently. "This is a multi-level operation." "Negative. Moving her now might trigger the remaining shooters. We need to neutralize all threats first." Marcus understood the logic, but it went against every protective instinct he had. Looking at the unconscious shooter, he noticed something interesting. The man was wearing expensive clothing and had military-style tattoos, but his hands were soft. Not the hands of someone who did physical work regularly. This suggested he might be part of a private military contractor, rather than a career criminal. "I'm going up to 8, Marcus reported. "Can you coordinate with the tactical teams to create a distraction at ground level?" "Roger that. Give me 30 seconds. Marcus moved toward the construction stairs leading to the 8th floor, but stopped when he heard voices above him. 2 men were talking in low tones, and their conversation was revealing. "Alpha is down," one voice said. "No response to radio check." "Stick to the plan," replied another voice with a different accent, possibly Eastern European. "We proceed in 60 seconds whether Alpha responds or not." Marcus realized they were working on a strict timeline. The princess was scheduled to spend exactly 15 minutes at the outdoor ceremony before moving inside the hospital, where she would be much safer. The shooters had probably calculated the optimal moment to take their shot. Through his earpiece, he heard Commander Mitchell coordinating the distraction. "All ground units implement diversion protocol. Charlie in 20 seconds. Marcus knew what this meant. The security teams would create a controlled commotion designed to draw attention and possibly force the shooters to reveal their positions. He used the brief time to position himself at the base of the stairs leading to the 8th floor. Right on schedule. He heard a series of loud voices and what sounded like a minor altercation breaking out near the hospital entrance. The princess's protection detail immediately moved her toward a more secure position, while maintaining the appearance that this was just crowd control. The voices above Marcus immediately became more urgent. "Now, take the shot now while they're distracted." Marcus knew he had to move fast. He bounded up the stairs 3 at a time, abandoning stealth for speed. As he reached the 8th floor, he could see 2 figures positioned near the windows, one with a rifle and another who appeared to be acting as a spotter with binoculars. The shooter was already aiming when Marcus reached the floor. There was no time for subtle tactics. Marcus shouted, "Royal Guard, drop your weapons," as he launched himself toward the nearest figure. The spotter spun around, reaching for a sidearm, but Marcus was already in motion. His military hand-to-hand combat training took over as he disarmed the man with a series of quick, precise movements. The spotter went down hard, his head hitting the concrete floor with a sickening thud. The shooter, realizing his mission was compromised, swung his rifle toward Marcus instead of maintaining his aim at the princess below. This split-second decision saved the princess's life, but put Marcus in immediate danger. The rifle barrel was coming around fast, and Marcus dove behind a concrete pillar just as the weapon fired. The shot echoed through the construction site like thunder. Marcus's ears rang, but he could hear shouting from below as the security teams reacted to the gunfire. Through his earpiece, he heard Commander Mitchell's voice. "Shots fired. Princess is secure." "Thompson, report! Still engaged?" Marcus called back, trying to determine the shooter's new position. The shooter had moved after taking his shot, using the construction materials as cover just as Marcus was doing. This was clearly someone with military training who understood tactical positioning. Marcus could hear the man moving carefully through the debris and plastic sheeting, trying to get a better angle. Marcus's radio crackled again. "Tactical team entering building. Hold your position." But Marcus knew that backup was still minutes away, and the shooter might have enough time to escape or take another shot at the princess if she emerged from her secure position. He had to end this confrontation now. Using a technique from his Special Forces training, Marcus created a noise diversion by throwing a piece of concrete debris to one side of his position. When the shooter moved to investigate the sound, Marcus went the opposite direction, flanking around behind him. The shooter realized the deception just as Marcus appeared behind him. The man spun around with his rifle, but Marcus was already inside his effective range. A brief, intense struggle ensued as both men fought for control of the weapon. Marcus's years of conditioning and combat experience gave him the advantage. He managed to wrestle the rifle away and pin the shooter to the ground. The man was still conscious but breathing heavily, clearly exhausted from the fight. "Who sent you?" Marcus demanded, keeping the man pinned down while maintaining watch for other potential threats. The shooter just stared at him with defiant eyes and said nothing. Marcus could hear the tactical team's boots on the stairs below. Backup was finally arriving. "Thompson, this is Alpha Team, we're coming up. 8th floor secure," Marcus reported. 2 subjects in custody, 1 unconscious on 7, 2 neutralized on 8. As the tactical team reached the 8th floor and began securing the scene, Marcus looked out through the plastic sheeting toward the hospital plaza. The Princess Royal was being escorted inside the building by her protection detail, safe but probably wondering why her public appearance had been cut short. Commander Mitchell's voice came through his earpiece one more time. "Outstanding work, Thompson. How did you know to check this building?" Marcus looked around at the construction site that had nearly become the scene of an assassination attempt. "Sometimes you just have to think like the enemy, Commander, and sometimes you get lucky." But as the tactical team began processing the scene and the suspects, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this operation had been too sophisticated for a simple assassination attempt. The coordination, the equipment, the knowledge of security protocols, it all pointed to something much larger than what they had uncovered. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in a secure briefing room at Scotland Yard, still wearing his civilian tactical gear. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving him exhausted but alert. Across from him sat Commander Mitchell, Inspector Davies, and a serious-looking woman in an expensive suit who had introduced herself only as Agent Cooper from the security service. The 3 captured men were being held in separate interrogation rooms, but so far none of them had said a word. Their fingerprints had come back with interesting results. All 3 were former military personnel from different countries who had worked for the same private security company based in Switzerland. "Blackwater Solutions," Agent Cooper said, sliding a file across the table to Marcus. "They're a legitimate private military contractor, but our intelligence suggests some of their personnel have been freelancing for clients with questionable motives." Marcus opened the file and studied the company profile. So this wasn't terrorism or foreign espionage. Someone hired professionals to assassinate the princess. "That's our working theory," Commander Mitchell confirmed, "but we still don't know who or why. The company claims these 3 men left their employment 6 months ago and that they have no knowledge of this operation." Agent Cooper leaned forward. "Marcus, I need to ask you about something. During your escape from those fake police officers this morning, you moved with skills that go beyond standard Royal Guard training. Your military file mentions special operations, but some details are classified above my clearance level." Marcus had been expecting this question. "Special Forces Anti-Terrorism Unit, 6 years active duty, mostly in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. I learned escape and evasion techniques, close quarters combat, and threat assessment." "And that's how you knew to check the construction building?" "Partly, but mostly it was common sense combined with understanding how professional operators think. These weren't amateurs, but they also weren't intelligence operatives. They had the skills but not the instincts." Inspector Davies, who had been quiet throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. "The fake police officers are still missing. We found their abandoned vehicle, but no trace of where they went. However, we did find something interesting in the trunk." He placed evidence bags on the table containing police uniforms, radios, and identification cards. "Everything looks authentic except for small details. The badges are perfect copies, but the metal composition is slightly wrong. The radio frequencies match our current protocols, but the encryption is outdated by about 6 months." Marcus studied the evidence. Someone with access to police equipment and procedures, but not current access. Either a former officer or someone with connections to law enforcement. Agent Cooper made notes on her tablet. "We're running deep background checks on anyone who has left the Metropolitan Police in the past year, cross-referencing with connections to private military companies." Commander Mitchell stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Thames. "What bothers me most is how they knew your patrol schedule, Marcus. That information isn't public and it changes weekly." This had been troubling Marcus as well. Either someone inside palace security is compromised, or they conducted surveillance long enough to learn the patterns. Given the sophistication of this operation, I'd guess the latter. "How long would that take?" Agent Cooper asked. "Months. Maybe longer. They would have needed to observe multiple shift changes, different weather conditions, special events, and security responses to various situations. The implications were sobering. If the operation had been planned for months, there might be other targets or other phases that hadn't been activated yet. The assassination attempt on the Princess Royal might have been just one part of a larger scheme. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and froze. The message was from an unknown number and contained just 5 words. "We know where you live." He showed the message to Commander Mitchell, who immediately called for a technical specialist to trace the number. Within minutes, they confirmed what Marcus already suspected. The message had been sent from a burner phone that was probably already destroyed. "We're moving you to a safe house," Agent Cooper announced. "This confirms that the operation extends beyond what we've uncovered today." But Marcus shook his head. "No. If they're watching me, moving to a safe house just tells them they've succeeded in making me afraid. I want to go back to my flat, but with surveillance support." Commander Mitchell looked skeptical. "That's risky, Marcus. We don't know how many people are involved in this. That's exactly why we need to draw them out. If I hide, we learn nothing. If I maintain my normal routine but with backup in place, we might catch whoever sent that message." Agent Cooper considered this. "It could work, but you'd essentially be bait." "I've been bait before," Marcus replied calmly. "The difference is that this time I know I'm bait, and I'll have professional support." The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would return to his flat in South London and follow his normal evening routine. Surveillance teams would be positioned around the building, and Marcus would wear a tracking device and hidden camera. If anyone approached his building or tried to contact him, the teams would be ready to respond. As Marcus prepared to leave Scotland Yard, Agent Cooper pulled him aside. "There's something else you should know. The rifle we recovered from the construction site? It's the same model used in 2 other assassination attempts in Europe over the past 6 months. One in Berlin, one in Paris. Both targets were government officials involved in international security policy." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "And both attempts failed?" "Yes. In both cases, the operations were disrupted by what appeared to be coincidental security interventions. Just like today. You think someone's been tracking this organization and disrupting their operations?" Agent Cooper's expression was unreadable. "We think you might not be the only person with your particular set of skills who's been paying attention to suspicious activities." As Marcus drove back to his flat in the unmarked police car, he reflected on the day's events. 12 hours ago, he had been a royal guard following a routine patrol. Now he was at the center of an international conspiracy involving assassination attempts, fake police officers, and mysterious messages. His flat was a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Clapham, chosen specifically because it offered good sight lines and multiple exit routes, habits from his military days that had never left him. As he approached his building, Marcus noticed that everything looked normal, but he could sense the presence of the surveillance teams positioned around the area. He climbed the stairs to his 3rd-floor flat, inserted his key in the lock, and paused.
Something felt wrong.
The lock turned too easily, as if someone had recently lubricated it. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed knife he always carried. But before he could react, his door opened from the inside. Standing in his living room was a woman he had never seen before. Tall, blonde, wearing dark clothing and a knowing smile. In her hand was a cup of tea that appeared to have been made from his own kitchen. "Hello, Marcus," she said in an accent he couldn't quite place. "I think it's time we had a conversation about what really happened today." Marcus remained perfectly still, calculating distances and angles while keeping his voice calm. "Who are you, and how did you get into my flat?" The woman took a sip of tea and gestured to the chair across from her. "My name is Elena, and let's just say I have the same employer you had during your Special Forces days. As for how I got in, well, you're not the only one with specialized training." Marcus realized that this day was far from over, and the mysterious events that had begun with fake police officers were about to become even more complicated.